Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are joining us from. We are here today with Tricia Meyer, who is the founder and managing attorney for Meyer Law Firm. We are also joined by Melody Ashby, who is the senior attorney. Hello, ladies. How are you?
Very good. Thank you so much for having us.
Oh, it's always a pleasure to talk business with you and get some great insights, which I think we're going to learn some more additional 5 great insights today, or if you want to grow your business. So that will be exciting. But first, Tricia, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure, I'm an entrepreneur at heart, lawyer by trade, founder and managing attorney over at the Meyer Law. And we started about 13 years ago, have offices in 4 different cities, and help companies with the business transactional aspects, corporate contracts, employment, intellectual property, fundraising, and privacy. We offer a lot of fixed fee packages for early stage companies. And as companies grow, we offer these general counsel packages that help companies kind of scale and grow and make sure that they have the right resources and support in place. And joined today here with Melody Ashby, who has been a senior attorney on the Meyer Law team and helped thousands of companies. We both mentor at incubators and accelerators across the US as well. And so love to help provide guidance and help educate and help prevent scaling companies from making mistakes.
Well, that's awesome. That is quite the accomplishment there. Speaking of growing companies, Meyer Law, I have been that you Meyer Law has been a sponsor of IT Business Owners Group for several years now. Happy to tell you, and I have watched Meyer Law grow as well
Yeah.
over the years. So that's very good accomplishments. It's nice to watch other companies grow and succeed. Certainly. Um, well, speaking of growing companies, I think we're going to talk today about 5 things to look out for if you want to grow your company.
That's right. So we're going to go through 5 questions that you should really be asking yourself and thinking about before you scale your business. And the first thing is, am I protecting my confidential information? So one of your most important assets as a business is your confidential information and your intellectual property. We're first going to talk about confidential information. You really want to make sure that if you are disclosing confidential information to another party, that they have signed an agreement with you, whether that be a confidentiality agreement or a non-disclosure agreement or a larger agreement with a confidentiality section in it. The goal is just to make sure that you are instructing this person how it is that they can use your information and in what circumstances, and then make it very clear that they can't disclose it otherwise and that they're basically on the hook if they do. It's really important to make sure that your definition of confidential information is broad enough to cover the information that you would be disclosing in these discussions or in these relationships and partnerships. And then you also want your obligations usually to extend beyond the length of the relationship. So whether that be 3 years, 5 years, or in perpetuity, it's important that you're trying to, have the longest period of time and buffer for that other party to keep your information confidential. So as part of this, before you grow and scale, it's important to take a look at your agreements and your relationships to make sure that they include the appropriate confidentiality provisions. The last thing you want to do is disclose your confidential information to someone that doesn't have an obligation to keep it confidential, and then you lose that right altogether across the board. And so you just don't want to put your company in that situation. And again, make sure that you're protecting one of your most valuable assets.
Very good information. A lot of people don't think about that.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And so one of the second questions that you might want to ask yourself as you are looking to grow scale is, am I actually protecting my intellectual property? And so intellectual property is going to be one of your company's most valuable assets. So you want to ensure that you're actually taking the steps to protect it. And when it comes to protecting intellectual property, agreements are really crucial, especially when you are acquiring IP, or maybe you're building your business and somebody is assisting, whether that's a service provider or not. But to the extent that you're growing and eventually want to sell your business or maybe seek investment down the line, protection of that IP is really going to be key, because if you don't protect it from day one, it's a huge disaster that you then have to work to clean up, and you just don't want to put yourself in that scenario. So get it in writing would be key number one. You want to make sure that your intellectual property is going to be buttoned up from a contract perspective. So you'll want to ensure that the company owns all of the intellectual property that you're using. If you don't own it, then you want to make sure that you have or you're appropriately licensing the IP. The default under the laws, whomever creates it owns it unless there's an agreement to the contrary. So if you have not actually signed an agreement with maybe a service provider, then and that service provider created IP for your business, you want to ensure that you're getting appropriate assignments in place or contracts in place to make you the owner of that IP. So really ask yourself, are all of the key intellectual property registered in the name of the company? You know, a lot of times if you started your business and you did so under your individual name as an example, but then later formed an actual entity, you want to make sure that you signed a contribution agreement or assignment in favor of your company. If your IP is not in order, like I mentioned before, then you want to ensure that you go back, get appropriate consents, assignment agreements in place. If you get a chance to fix it right before you get into a larger scenario, and you always want to have the end in mind when you're forming and running your business. And so ensuring that all of the IP, evaluating your customer agreements, your partnerships, your joint venture relationships and obligations, and ensure that all of the terms are buttoned up from that perspective. And in case of service agreements, it's just preferable to get these things in place prior, just to avoid those delays. There's a contractual perspective, like I mentioned, but then also you want to take into account traditional IP protection. So those would be things like copyrights, trademarks. And so for a copyright perspective, copyright's a form of protection of your intellectual property. It protects original works of authorship. So think paintings, photography, literature, source code, software. Those are all types of things that you may seek copyright protection over. Generally, copyright owners have exclusive rights to authorize the use of your intellectual property. So you could reproduce the work in whole or part. You can prepare derivative works. You can publicly perform. You could publicly display. But the thing with a copyright is you actually get automatic protection under common law as soon as the work is put in tangible form, which means you don't necessarily have to seek and register with the Copyright Office in order for it to be protected. The reason why you would, though, is that enables you to actually seek additional remedies that you would not be able or be entitled to if you don't take that separate step. Especially with copyright registrations, it's pretty straightforward. The fees are nominal. So it's something that we would push and definitely suggest that you get in place to formally help protect the business. From a branding perspective, if you have a name, a logo, a design, a tagline, all of those things help identify your brand. And so if you want to get exclusive rights to use that brand across the US, then I would definitely suggest pushing to get trademark protection. So trademark identifies or distinguishes one product or service from another. So, think Google, Apple, Starbucks, all of those are brands and trademarks that the public in large can generally identify as the source of those goods or services. So the thing that you want to do with trademarks is first perform a clearance, make sure that you run a search to ensure that nobody else is using a similar name or logo in connection with similar types of services. Once you've determined that you're in the clear, then you can actually move forward with the use of the name and logo, and then obtain additional rights by filing a trademark registration with the United States Patent and Trademark Office. And again, the most beneficial thing for purposes of registering the trademark is that you're notifying the public and putting claim on ownership of your mark and branding. And then you are then establishing exclusive rights with respect to that product or service in connection with your branding. And it honestly just strengthens the ability for you to potentially take legal action if there is down the line some type of third party coming in trying to use your branding that creates brand dilution, obviously potential for trademark infringement as well. In the meantime, what you can do is you can use the TM, little TM, for product-based registrations, or a little SM applied for service-based trademarks. even if you haven't filed for a trademark yet, that's just putting the public on notice that you're claiming superior rights to that name. The only time you can use that R with the circle around is when you actually have a federal trademark.
Okay.
And once you actually have the trademark protection, you want to make sure that you're just monitoring it and you have to continue to use it. Otherwise, you can lose protection. And in the US, you can establish first use in interstate commerce, and that typically means you'll have superior rights to the name.
Okay. And I've got a quick question about trademarking. Meyer Law actually trademarked IT Business Owners Group, helped us with that a couple of years ago. And I remember the process very well. But, one thing that I don't do is I don't all the time go in and put the little R, like you said, at the bottom, or the TM for that matter. I think, honestly, I could use either or. But how often how should I be doing that on every single thing that I put my brand in?
Yeah, like where you have your logo, you might want to have the R with the circle because that signifies, hey, I am the trademark owner of this. It doesn't mean that you lose your rights if you don't use it, but
Okay.
you took the time and you have exclusivity with respect to your branding. So I would absolutely
Sure.
be using it.
All right. Well, I'm going to have to get in touch with my graphic designer and get a new logo created with the R at the bottom. So, all right. Well, very good information. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course.
Awesome. Okay, well, moving along. So the next question that you need to really ask yourself is, do I have all of the right contracts in place and are they structured the right way? So a lot of times people won't realize that they need to get contracts in place for whatever reason. They think, oh, I'm just hiring this person for something, for them to do something real fast. I don't need a contract. Well, you do need a contract, especially if they're creating something for you, because more than likely, like Melody touched on, you'll want to make sure that you own the intellectual property related to whatever it is that they created for you. So that's just one of many terms that you would want included in a particular contract, and it really depends on the relationship. So different relationships require different contracts because there are just different considerations and different risks inherent in the relationship or partnership that you're entering into. And so that's not to say that you need an absolutely different contract for every single, contract that you enter into, but you should definitely get baselines in place for your customer contracts, your contractor agreement, your employment agreement or offer letter and non-disclosure agreement. You should definitely have certain key baselines in place that you will regularly use within your business. And within those, you should think about your business and then those relationships you're entering into, and then tailor those contracts specifically to your business and your risk tolerance and all of that. We have some clients who want everything super buttoned up, ironclad. We have other clients who are willing to take on a fair amount of risk just because they want to get the deal done. And so making sure that you're keeping your risk tolerance in mind when drafting your contracts, it's really important. And also making sure you're structuring it the right way. The last thing you want to do is get caught up in legal when you're working on a customer contract, right? So you want to think about how to structure it the best way to get it pushed through as quickly as possible. Is that a click to agree? Is that a traditional version where you've got to kind of negotiate and send red lines back and forth? Is it a hybrid of the two? Being really thoughtful in all the different situations and relationships that you're entering into as to how to structure it in the most efficient manner is really, really important. It's important to do that before you scale and grow. It's also important to have a legal team look at your contracts before you scale and grow, because the last thing you want to do is have a shitty term in there and then all of a sudden you're getting it signed over and over and over again, causes some issue down the line, and you realize that you have just signed it 100 times with 100 different, clients or whatever the case may be. So making sure that you have solid baselines and you understand any risks you're taking on by not including particular concepts or language or whatever the case may be. I'd also caution you against using things that you find online and just, running with it. Again, you have different relationships, different businesses, different risk tolerances, and you want to make sure that those agreements are really tailored to you. And you can't just assume that something that you find online is going to fit your business. And we see it all the time in the startup world, especially as we mentor all of these companies. They're pulling a privacy notice from here and a terms from there. But then when you really dig in and look at it, it doesn't even like fit their business whatsoever. So just making sure that you have the right contracts in place for the right situations and they're structured in the right way and easy for you to manage is really key. And then the last thing I'll say on this point is make sure that you're staying organized with all of your documents. Set up, a repository in wherever, Drive, Box, Dropbox. There's so many different tools out there. And make sure that you're staying up on getting all the signed copies in there and the final drafts and all of that, because if you end up looking for money down the line, raising money down the line, or just, the general running of your business, you don't want to be digging around all the time looking for stuff in one hand, wasting time. And then on the other hand, if you are going to look for investors, they're going to do due diligence on you and want access to your data room, which is basically all of your documents. And you're not going to want to have to get that together and scramble and, look like a mess in front of an investor.
Very good point. I will be the first to tell you, in IT Business Owners Group, there are a lot of members, especially new members, when they join in, they will be the first ones to say, "Hey, does anyone have an MSA that they can share?"
Right.
And it's like everybody's business is different. We all run different businesses, so why wouldn't you want one that is an agreement that is custom tailored to your business? So, and I think at least get an attorney to look over one of those templated agreements, if you will.
Right.
Yeah, so in connection with that, like another question, I guess I should say, that you should ask yourself as you're kind of growing and scaling is, where should I expand and how does that impact my business? And one of the ways that you expand is by hiring additional folks, whether that's employees or contractors, to help you in, service your customers and or clients. But when you're thinking through hiring, you have to think about the location of individuals. Now, it's not so much an issue when you're hiring contractors, but there are definitely specific regulations you have to follow if you're going to treat the individual as an employee. So you're probably thinking, well, how do I know? Is the person that I'm hiring an employee or an independent contractor? So accurate classification is going to be really important. So the Department of Labor and IRS essentially partnered together and they shared information to determine whether or not a company or employer is actually misclassifying their workers. If you happen to misclassify, for example, an independent contractor, and they were supposed to be classified as an employee, then what can happen is it's going to result in fines, penalties. There's potential repayment of back taxes as well. And so to avoid that, you just have to think through the classification. It's a gray sliding scale. And the answer is going to be dependent on a lot of different factors, but ultimately it determines your liability to pay and withhold federal income tax, Social Security, Medicare, and federal unemployment tax. So the factors that you'll want to look at is really the degree of control that you have over an individual. Are you telling them how to do their job? Are you giving them the resources to do their job? Are you paying for their expenses? Are you managing and controlling their activities? If so, that's going to lean more towards a W-2 employee. If not, then you can likely classify them as a contractor. So a true contractor relationship would be, IT Business Group hiring Meyer Law as an attorney. You're hiring us to perform a service, but you're not telling us how to do our job. And so from that aspect, we would really be classified as a contractor. And because we're classified as a contractor, that means that IT Business Group does not have to take the entity and foreign qualify in the state where we're located because we're an independent contractor relationship. Now, if you were hiring me individually as your counsel, but you're going to pay me as an attorney, that would change the relationship because now I'm going to be considered an employee in your business. And what that would require you to do is take your entity and qualify it to do business in Illinois because that's where I'm located. And typically what happens when you're hiring employees is that it's going to be the state's laws where the employee resides as kind of that governing force of how you have to treat the employee. And so that would necessitate taking your company, finding an address or a registered agent, and paying additional fees in every state. And so what happened during COVID is a lot of businesses were initially hiring where they're located, and then all of a sudden people were working from home more than they
Sure.
were, and now they're hiring all these employees across the US. Well, what a lot of clients didn't realize is that the compliance and the cost to then register in all of the states where they were hiring folks was an added cost that they didn't anticipate. And so you could potentially be having employees, in across the US. Well, that would require you to then comply with all of those state laws. So looking at that cost, looking at making sure that you're classifying, these are all things that you want to take into account as you're expanding. And so if you're looking to keep costs low, you might want to then only hire in the states where you're currently registered with your business. And so taking that into account is really key, because you will have to foreign qualify, which again just means that you not only have to pay fees in the state where you're incorporated, but then you're going to have to pay a registered agent, file annual reports, and pay additional filings in the state where you're hiring these folks.
Wow, I didn't even think about that until you brought it up. But yeah, that's a big deal for companies, especially if they have a remote workforce now.
Absolutely. And then as Trisha mentioned, when you're hiring these folks, whether they are an employee or a contractor, then you need to get the appropriate agreement in place to cover that relationship. So with an employment agreement, usually, as Trish mentioned, either offer letter, NDA, or employment agreement, either are fine. But within those agreements, you're going to talk about the services, the job duties, benefits, the start date, cover off confidentiality, as we already discussed, and then think through ownership of inventions, also already discussed. You want to make sure that the company owns everything that the service providers are providing. So if they invent something that relates to the business is going to want to own that. And so that should be within those agreements. And then if you're looking to enforce any restrictive covenants, you'll need to look at the state-specific laws of where these individuals are located. But things like a non-compete, non-solicit, non-circumvention of business. You don't want necessarily folks misappropriating your confidential information and using it to try to steal customers away, as an example. So if those are concerns of yours, then you want to have an agreement with those restrictive covenants within it. Similarly, in a contractor relationship, you also want to have similar terms with respect to the services, how you're going to pay fees. Is it going to be on a time and materials basis? Is it a fixed fee? Is it project to project? How you're going to hire? More important, you want to ensure that you have protections in there for purposes of ownership, confidentiality, similar in an employment relationship, but the relationship's structured a little bit differently. So the agreement's going to be a little bit different. And in that context, you might want, because you don't have control over the contractor, to have additional protections like indemnification, which is where you'll require the contractor to step in your shoes and make you whole for things that are outside of your control. So for example, if they're developing software for you and they rip code from a third party, incorporated into the product, well, you're the one that's going to be sued, but you also don't want to be the one left holding the bag. So have that indemnification in there to make sure that the individual or company that you hired takes responsibility for the services that they provided.
Very good information. I bet that happens all the time with software developers.
Yeah. All right. And then lastly, we'll cover off, the last question that you really should be asking yourself: do I have the right processes in place and the people in place to scale? So you want to look at your processes just from an operational standpoint and make sure that everything is streamlined and structured the right way, not only from a contractual standpoint, but from a process standpoint. So that way you can hit that level of speed and make sure that, you're automating as much as you can and all of that. And then having the right people in the right seats. I think that is a challenge for any business owner. Hiring is really, really difficult, and finding the right people can be very difficult. And so making sure that you're, building out the right team, and then, making sure you're getting the right agreements, as Melody mentioned, in place with them, and the right protections, and doing all the things that you should be as you scale and grow.
Well, that was some excellent information for our members, especially those who are wanting to grow their business, which I would assume everyone is if they're in IT Business Owners Group. So thank you, ladies, for your time today. I certainly appreciate the information, and we will have to do this again next time.
Absolutely. Thank you for having us.
No problem. The pleasure's all mine. Y'all enjoy the rest of your day. Take care.
You
Bye-bye.
too. Bye.